The sound came before the woman did. Callum Dre had been riding the Lower Creek route for the better part of an hour, cutting east of the Ponderosa stand where the bank flattened and the channel narrowed between walls of reddish clay, when the laughter reached him. Not nearby, 40 yards ahead, around the bend where the creek turned south. He pulled his horse up short and sat. He had ridden a lot of creek routes in his 31 years. He had never heard one laugh back. September in New Mexico territory had a particular way with late light, low and amber, cutting sideways through a mounting grey sky with a warmth that lied about what was coming. The clouds over the Sangre de Cristo range had been piling since noon, heavy-bottomed and bruise-purple, and Callum had been watching them build the way you watch a quiet man's hands in a saloon, without looking like you're watching. The Weaver Ranch was 3 miles back. The storm was probably 2 hours out. Probably was doing a great deal of work in that estimation, and he knew it, and he kept riding anyway. He touched his heels to his horse and rounded the bend. She was lying in the creek, a woman on her back, half submerged in the center of the channel. One arm extended straight toward the sky, head tilted, mouth open, laughing. Dark hair loose across the surface of the mud. She wore a work shirt and canvas trousers, both soaked to the color of the creek bed, both clinging. From horseback, in the amber light cutting low across the water, she looked like a woman who had decided to take her afternoon rest in the most impractical stretch of real estate in Guadalupe County. Callum stopped. He sat in the saddle and watched. The woman was Nora Weaver. He had been working her ranch for 18 days. She had told him on the first morning what she needed: fence line along the north pasture, the bay mare's shoes reset, the drainage ditch off the south barn cleared before the full rains. She had handed him a list, written in a careful, deliberate hand, held his gaze for 3 seconds to see what he was made of, and walked back inside. He had seen her twice since, both times at distance. She ran her own operation with the focused economy of someone who had learned not to expect help and had stopped leaving room for it in her plans. He did not know her well enough to know what he was looking at. "Mrs. Weaver," he called. She turned her head toward him. The laughter kept on. Not the laughter of something funny, not the loose, open sound of a woman without a care in the territory. Something else. Something underneath all of that, raw and repetitive, like a sound running because it had nowhere better to go. "Creek's nice this time of year," she said, when it faded enough for words. Her voice was steady. Her chin was lifted. She said it the way a person delivers a true statement that is entirely beside the point. Callum stepped down from the saddle. He tied his horse, the stocky dun he called Biscuit, to the forked trunk of a dead juniper above the bank, checking the knot twice. He came to the edge and looked down. The clay was wrong. He saw it in the same second. He registered that she hadn't moved since he rounded the bend. Not an inch, not even a settling of weight, not a shift of a hand. The creek bed at this particular bend had been collecting the season's silt since the first August rains, layer upon layer of the fine red alluvium washing down from the high country and settling in the slower water of the inside curve. What looked from above like the firm, packed clay of the bank was something else entirely, a deep pocket of waterlogged silt that had taken on the consistency of wet mortar, heavy, cold, slow to give, and reluctant to release anything it closed around. The surface held the appearance of solid ground right up until the moment it didn't. Her hips were not resting on the surface. They were not visible at all. "How long?" he said. She met his eyes. Something moved across her face. Not quite pain, not quite relief. Something caught between the two and unable to resolve itself, and was gone before he could name it. "Since about midday, I reckon." Midday. The sun had dropped behind the ridgeline now, the amber going thin and cold at the edges of the sky. That was close to 6 hours. He crouched at the water's edge, and pressed his palm flat to the clay 2 feet from where she lay. It held for half a beat, then gave. His hand sank to the wrist in the cold, dense material before he pulled it back. The drag of it like pushing into fresh, poured concrete, the cold going through his fingers and straight up the arm. He pressed again at a different spot. Same result. Deeper pocket. He wiped his hand on his trousers and looked upstream. The water was not the same color as when he had started the route. An hour ago, it had been pale over the gravel, clear enough to read the bottom through a foot of depth. Now it ran with a brown tinge, the specific brown of clay disturbed at elevation, of runoff gathered from the dry washes and drainage cuts up in the high country, of rain that had already hit somewhere far above the tree line and was now making its way down through 1,000 smaller channels into this one. He had not heard thunder yet, but that color moved ahead of what was coming the way dust moved ahead of a herd. He stood up. "Can you feel your legs?" "I can feel them," she said. "They just won't come with me." He nodded once, the nod of a man who has received a clear set of facts and has decided to work with them rather than wish for different ones. He pulled off his boots and set them on the bank above the waterline, unbuckled his gun belt. The Colt and holster landed soft on the clay beside the boots. He checked the knot on Biscuit's line a second time. Biscuit was already moving against it, ears up and forward, nostrils working at the air coming down from upstream. She had smelled the water long before he had. He stepped into the creek. The cold hit him at the shin and drove upward without pause. The clay closed around his ankle on contact. Not like water, not like ordinary river silt, with a pressure that was patient and certain, as though the creek bed had been waiting for another opportunity. He planted each step carefully, feeling for the gravel layer beneath the soft top, and waded to her in 4 long strides, with the water pressing hard at his thighs and the bottom pulling at each foot as he lifted it. She was looking at the sky again, jaw set. Not at him. He put both hands below the surface and found the clay around her hips. He pressed. Nothing moved. He leaned in with his full weight and felt the ground under his own knees begin to yield beneath the pressure. She was set in the clay as completely as a fence post that had been standing since spring. 6 hours of sinking and settling, and the material packing itself tighter around her with each degree of cold, with each increment of her own stillness. He sat back on his heels in the water. The cold was in his chest now. He looked at the bank, at the dead juniper, at Biscuit pulling the line taut with her whole neck. He looked at the sky over the ridge to the north. Then he heard it. Not thunder, not wind. A low, continuous rushing, the particular voice of volume moving through a narrow place and not moving slowly. He had heard that exact sound once before, in canyon country in Arizona Territory, and he had gotten out of the way on that occasion because his horse had moved first. The flood front. 8 minutes, maybe 6. He looked at Nora Weaver. She was still looking at the sky. Her right arm was still extended, elbow cocked at a deliberate angle, not from any accident of the clay, he realized, but from a decision she had made and renewed at some point in the last 3 hours, to keep that one part of herself above the cold, above the surface, above the water that was coming, whether she wanted it to or not. The jaw was shaking. Not fear. Cold. She was showing him the difference between the two, clearly and without comment. "I need your help with this," he said. She brought her eyes to him. The laughter was gone. What occupied the space it had left was something sealed and steady, the expression of a person who had been alone with a bad situation long enough to come to their own terms with it, and who had now been interrupted in that process by someone who apparently intended to negotiate different terms entirely. "You can't pull me straight up," she said. "No," he said. "I know that. Listen to me." He moved to her left side, planting his feet wide. Lean toward me. Slow. Don't rush it. Keep leaning even after it pushes back, even when it feels like it's pulling harder than before. When the seal breaks, you'll know it. Don't try to stand, just lean and don't stop. She held his gaze. 1 beat. 2. Then something in her body organized itself. That small, specific preparation of a person who has made a decision to trust someone, perhaps on thinner evidence than they would prefer, and is honoring that decision regardless. Callum put both hands back under the clay and started working. It did not give quickly. The clay was cold and dense, and it had 6 hours of intention behind it. He drove his fingers in around her left hip, not pulling, pressing, breaking the seal the way you work a boot from deep mud. Rock and release, each cycle moving the material a little further, loosening the grip a degree at a time. His arms burned from the shoulder down. The cold had moved from his chest to his stomach. The upstream roar was no longer distant. It was arriving, the leading edge of the flood front pushing volume into the channel, the water at his thighs climbing toward his hips with the slow, indifferent purpose of something that did not know he was there and would not have changed its behavior if it did. Biscuit broke the juniper line. He heard the hooves hit the bank above him and scramble up the slope, heard Biscuit snort as she cleared the top and ran, and did not look up. He could not afford to look up. Nora leaned, steady, deliberate, her whole upper body listing toward him at the angle he had asked for. A controlled, specific movement, the kind a person makes when they have decided to believe someone and are following through on that decision with everything they have left. The clay cracked on the left hip. A deep, hollow pop, like a sealed jar opened from the bottom. A sound that travelled up through both his hands and both his arms and into the centre of his chest. And she came sideways, and he caught her by the arm, and they went over together into the water. Cold covered his face. He came up with both hands on her and found his feet on the gravel at the edge of the channel. She surfaced beside him, gasping, not laughing, gasping, the specific, involuntary sound of a body releasing what it had been holding back through an act of sheer, prolonged will. Her upper body was free. Her left hip was free. Her legs were still buried to mid-thigh in the deeper clay of the main channel behind them, and the water driving against his back now had real weight to it. The flood front's leading edge, cold and relentless, carrying debris and current and the full accumulated volume of the high country's afternoon, down through the narrow channel toward everything standing in its path. He looked at her face. She looked back at him. Her jaw shook. Cold. Still the difference. Still showing him. Again, she said. The water wanted its creek bed back, and it was not patient about it. Callum could feel the flood front's pressure against his chest. Not just current, but the consolidated weight of everything the high country had shed since noon, moving fast and without negotiation through the narrow channel. He braced with both feet wide on the gravel of the inner bank, the water at his ribs, Nora's wrists in both his hands, and the clay still held her legs as though it had a separate opinion on the matter and had not been consulted. She made no sound now but breath, controlled and deliberate, the breathing of someone who had learned, somewhere in the course of her years, that noise cost more than it returned when the situation was already at full cost. "Put your hands on my shoulders," he said. She put them there. He went under. Full immersion, the cold took everything at once, light and sky replaced by brown water and the close, dense silence of the creek bottom. He found the back of her left knee by feel, working through the murk with his palms until they hit the clay above and behind the joint. The seal there was thinner than it had been at the hip. 6 hours of water running over it had softened the outer layer, and he rocked the leg in small, careful arcs and felt the material give a little at a time. Not cleanly, not quickly, but persistently. He came up, water at his chin. "Left leg's nearly free," he said. She nodded once, her hands on his shoulders pressed down. Not a grip, not a clutch, just weight. The specific weight of someone who has made a decision to lean on another person and is honoring that decision in the only way left available to them. He went back under. The left leg released on the third rotation. A slow, deliberate give, less drama than the hip had offered, more stubbornness. The joint turned and the suction broke, and the knee came up through the water, and she pushed down on his shoulders, and he rose with it, and the leg was clear. The right was worse. The clay on the right side had a deeper pocket, older silt, undisturbed since before the summer rains, the kind that filled in around whatever it enclosed and kept filling, patient as geology. He went down a third time and worked it with both hands from underneath, his lungs burning past comfortable and moving towards serious. The floodfront's voice coming through the water now as a low vibration in the creek bed itself, the sound of the land being moved. He found the heel. He worked the clay away from it in small circles. He felt the ankle flex. On the fourth dive, he got his hands around the calf and rotated. Slowly, steadily, the way you move an injured animal and not a broken piece of machinery. And the right leg came loose with a sound he felt more than heard, and Nora dragged her knees onto the gravel beside him, and they moved for the bank together, crawling through the current on hands and knees, and Callum did not look at anything but the slope of clay above them. 3 miles uphill at the Weaver Ranch, Hector Vasquez had been forking the evening hay into the South Corral trough when the roan mare pushed hard against the fence rail and threw her head up. He looked across the yard. Callum Dre's dun horse, the stout, broad-chested animal he called Biscuit, was standing at the corral gate, saddle still on, both stirrups hanging free, reins trailing in the dust. The horse had stopped running but barely. Her sides were moving fast, and her eyes showed white at the rims. Hector set the pitchfork against the rail. He had worked this ranch 7 years. He had seen horses come back without riders before, and he could read the difference between a horse that had slipped a knot and drifted, and a horse that had left somewhere at speed and not looked back. He looked at the sky, the storm pressing in from the west, the last light going thin at the ridge, the clouds moving with purpose. He looked at the direction the dun had come from, down toward the lower creek route where the clay ran deep after August rains. He went to the barn without hurrying, because hurrying in the wrong direction served no one. He saddled his black gelding with the economy of a man who had spent enough years in difficult country to know that preparation outran urgency every time. He took the coil of rope from the wall peg, pulled his slicker off the nail beside the door. His hand touched the rifle stock in the scabbard. Not intent, just the habit of a careful man, and he rode out toward the lower creek route at a long, open lope, the ranch behind him going quiet under the first press of the storm. He did not know exactly what he was riding toward. He knew enough. They made the bank on hands and knees. Callum got one foot on solid clay above the waterline and pulled, and Nora came over the lip of the bank, and they both went down in the flattened grass above the channel, him on his side, her on her back, both of them flat, both of them still, the creek below them roaring with a voice it had not owned an hour ago. Swollen bank to bank and carrying cottonwood branches and root masses from the high country, spreading its brown water into the lower grass, indifferent to the fence line it was taking. The rain hit then, not a warning and not a curtain, the full weight of the storm coming down at once, cold and flat and complete, washing the mud from the grass in long channels and depositing it somewhere else, as the land was always doing. He became aware, through the rain and the sound of the creek and the burning in both arms, that she was laughing again. Not the same way, The creek laughter had been bright and taut, the sound of something held upright by the force of its own effort. This was quieter, almost private, something that had come out because the body had stopped holding everything at once. He pushed himself up onto one elbow and looked at her. She had her forearm across her eyes. Her chest moved in the thin, barely audible rhythm of it. He sat up fully in the rain and studied her face. Mud still thick in her hair, water washing clean channels in the clay on her cheeks and forehead. And he made a decision. "Tell me about the laughing," he said. She lowered her arm, held the rain on her face for a moment. "I've always done it," she said, "since I was a girl. When something frightens me past a certain point, that's what comes out of me." Her eyes moved to the dark sky above them. "My mother did it too. She'd laugh at a rattler, laugh at lightning, at a horse going over a bad crossing." Something opened briefly in her face. A door, and then the door closing, but leaving light behind it. "Embarrassed me terribly when I was young. Then she was gone, and I would have given nearly anything to hear it just once more." He waited. Earl couldn't stand it. The name came out without inflection, the way the names of the dead eventually come out, stripped of tone, because all the tone has already been spent somewhere private. Said it wasn't fitting, that a grown woman shouldn't laugh when she was scared. Wasn't natural, wasn't right. She turned her head and looked at the swollen creek through the rain. "I tried to stop. Couldn't, no matter how I set my mind to it. Spent a good many years being ashamed of something I had no more power over than my own face." The laughter had stopped. She wasn't doing it anymore. He sat in the rain beside her and said nothing about it for a while. He had seen fear come out of people in every shape imaginable. Weeping, silence, fury, a kind of cold stillness that was more frightening than any of the others. Laughter had never once seemed to him the worst of the shapes it took. He had, in certain low moments of his own life, understood it completely. She turned her head and looked at him. "You went under 4 times, she said. He thought about it. 4, he said. Something settled in her expression. Not gratitude, not relief. Something more complicated and slower moving than either. The particular look of a person who has been witnessed in a moment they did not choose, in a condition they did not plan for, and has found, to their own quiet surprise, that the person witnessing them did not look away. She put her hand on his forearm. Not a grip, not a clutch, just the weight of her palm on his arm, in the rain, for a moment that was exactly as long as it needed to be. He let it sit there. "Your horse ran off," she said, after a while. "I know." "Hector'll come." "I figured," he said. She took her hand back, pulled herself together, and tried to rise, and her legs gave out entirely. 6 hours of cold clay and the creek's work collecting their full fee at once, and he caught her under the arms before she reached the ground, and held her until she had herself back. Somewhere up the hill, through the rain and the dark, hooves were moving at pace. Hector, riding as he always rode, ahead of the thing he was needed for, and without drama. Hector arrived the way he always arrived at trouble, a half-step ahead of it and without ceremony. He came down the ridge through the rain at a controlled lope, slicker running dark, and pulled up on the bank above them. He took in Callum and Nora standing in the grass below him, both soaked through, both clay-dark to the hairline. Nora held upright by Callum's arm, her legs still arriving at a consensus about their responsibilities, and looked at the swollen creek behind them, marking its height against the bank. He looked at the rope in his hand, and at the 4-foot bank between them. He looked at Callum. "She need a doctor," he said. "She needs dry clothes," Nora said. Callum nodded once. Hector accepted this as a complete transaction and swung down. He got the rope around Nora's waist, not for drama, for the steep clay climb back to flat ground, and helped her up the bank with a hand that was steady and unhurried. She went up, putting her weight into each step, her hands on the slope above her, not asking for anything beyond what was offered. Callum came up after, the muscles in both arms protesting the final effort and being ignored. Above the bank, the ground levelled out, and the Ponderosa stand broke the worst of the wind. The full rain was still coming down, but the trees channeled it into lines off their branches, and the noise of it organised itself into a surrounding pattern rather than a direct assault. For the first time since he had stepped into the creek, Callum stood still and felt his own body in full. The cold in his chest, the burn running shoulder to fingertip, the particular heavy uselessness of soaked clothing that had given up all insulating value and was now simply weight. He put his hands on his knees and stayed there. Hector was already at his saddle, loosening the strings on the left cantle. He produced the dark green wool blanket, the one that lived behind the cantle as a matter of course, put there by a man who had been solving problems on this land for 7 years and had learned to carry solutions before he needed them. He handed it to Nora without looking at her. No ceremony, no commentary. The practiced gesture of someone who helps because the helping needs doing, not because the helping needs to be seen. She pulled it around her shoulders. The shaking in her legs slowed. The rain was coming straight down now, the sideways wind having moved on to the east and left the vertical weight of the storm behind. Above the Ponderosas, the black mass of the storm was moving. Not clearing, not yet, but the densest part of it shifting east, its trailing edges going thin and ragged. The Sangre de Cristo ridge appeared in fragments through the moving cloud, black rock against dark sky, trading places in the breaks. Nora sat down on a wide root at the base of the largest Ponderosa. She sat straight. People who have survived something close generally do. There is a specific quality of uprightness they carry for a while afterward, as though the near miss has reminded them of their own outline, and they are choosing not to forget it immediately. She did not cry out or collapse or perform anything. What passed through her face was quiet and private, and she did not wipe it away or acknowledge it, only let it move through her the way weather moves through open country. It took about a minute. She sat straight through all of it. Callum crouched nearby and looked at the tree line and did not look at her, which was exactly the right thing to do. Hector, needing to check on the horses, went to check on the horses. He took his time with it, walked both animals slowly around the perimeter of the Ponderosa stand, checking their legs in the rain dark, letting them settle. He could have done it in 2 minutes. He took 5. When he came back, the two by the root were quiet and close, sitting in the particular silence of people who do not need to fill it. And he stayed at the tree line with the horses and did not intrude. After a while, the last of it passed from Nora's face. "I went to check the drainage on the south bank," she said. Her voice had its steadiness back. "The one you cleared. The rain last week pushed new silt down into the bend. I stepped in to gauge the depth, and the clay took me before I had time to read it." He sat down on the ground beside the root. She did not wait for him to offer a reaction. "It wasn't your doing," she said, directly and without softness. The statement of a woman who had spent 6 hours alone with the full accounting of the situation and had arrived at a conclusion she intended to stand by. "I know that drainage. I walked in without looking. That's on me." He didn't argue. It wasn't the moment for argument, and she hadn't asked for it. But he noted the detail, filed it alongside 18 days of watching a woman run a ranch alone, making every decision from a knowledge base that had no one else to check it against, taking the cost of each mistake without distributing it anywhere. Nora Weaver had been 4 years in the ground. She had been running this land and herself, and the grief of both without a net under any of it. "Earl used to say the land will kill you as soon as look at you," she said after a moment. That the only thing keeping a person standing was whether they remembered it on any given morning. She looked through the tree trunks toward the creek, still loud below them, still running bank to bank with the high country's rain. "I forgot to remember it this morning." The storm was clearing in earnest now. He could see it happening above the ponderosas, the trailing edge of the cloud mass going thin and ragged, and then the sky beginning to open, stars appearing in small patches, and then more of them, and then the storm's trailing edge moved past entirely, and the rain stopped with the decisiveness of a door closing, and the New Mexico territory spread itself out in the washed dark, with its full scale back on display. The ridges black against the indigo sky, the desert floor silver with pooled water, the smell of sage and rain-soaked rock, and ozone coming clean and cold on the air off the mountains. Nora looked at the sky for a long time. "My mother used to say," she said, "that the land doesn't remember what it does to people. Only people remember it." She pulled the blanket tighter across her chest. "I always thought she meant that as a tragedy. Lately I'd been thinking she might have meant it as a relief." He sat beside her. The route was wide enough for two. He sat on it, and she didn't move over, and he didn't either. And the ponderosa dripped around them in the after-rain quiet, the slow, soft percussion of gathered water working its way down through the branches in lines, the smell of pine resin and cold, wet earth rising from the needle floor. "You've got the north fence to finish," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "The bay mare's shoes." "I know." "And that drainage, properly this time, before the next rain loosens more silt." "First thing in the morning," he said, "before it dries out." She looked at him. He looked back. The moon was coming through in the breaks of the cloud, thin and cool, not enough to see by exactly, but enough to see faces. Hers was cleaned by the rain, most of the clay gone, her eyes dark and steady, and watching him with an expression that was several things at once, and that had no single name he could put to it. "You didn't have to go in," she said. Quiet, not an accusation, not a question, just the fact of it, held up for examination. Callum sat with that for a moment. The creek talked below them. A coyote called somewhere far to the north and was not answered. "No," he said, "I didn't." He did not explain further, and she did not ask him to. Some accounting in that country, in those years, was done entirely in the act of a thing, and needed no translation put after it. A man had ridden past a laughing woman in a creek, turned back, stepped into the water, gone under 4 times, and come out with her. That was the full sentence. It did not require a footnote. Hector came back from the horses with an unhurried step and stood at the edge of the trees, holding the lines, with the patience of a man who had decided he had not seen anything in the last 10 minutes and intended to go on not having seen it for as long as was useful. Nora stood from the root. Her legs held her this time. Not easily, but they held, and she accepted that as sufficient. She pulled the blanket from her shoulders, folded it cleanly, and tied it back behind Hector's saddle, because she was done with it, and things went where they belonged. Then she walked to Hector's horse, accepted the stirrup, and mounted with the particular resolution of someone who has decided that one chapter of the evening is closed and the next has started, and who intends to enter it under her own authority. Callum rose and brushed pine needles from his trousers. Hector handed him the reins of the black gelding without comment and swung up behind him, and they rode out of the Ponderosa stand together. 3 riders into the open country, the stars overhead and the desert still draining around them, the air carrying sage and petrichor, and the cold clarity that only comes after a storm has cleaned everything all the way through. Nora rode ahead, sitting straight, hair drying in the night wind off the mountains. Callum rode behind her and said nothing. Hector sat behind him and said nothing. This was exactly the correct amount of conversation for the occasion, and all three of them seemed to understand this without discussing it. The lights of the Weaver ranch came into view at the bottom of the long grade. One lamp burning yellow in the window of the house, small and steady against the dark. Nora stopped her horse at the gate and turned in the saddle and looked back at Callum. He stopped beside her. She held his gaze in the dark, the kind of look that holds for a moment before either person knows what to do with it, that asks nothing specific and opens something unspecific, and waits. Then she turned, rode through the gate and toward the house. He watched her go. Hector climbed down without being asked, took the reins of his own horse and walked toward the barn. He had managed, over the course of the entire evening, to be precisely as present as the situation required, and precisely as absent as it required, and he had done this without instruction or acknowledgement, and this was most of what made him indispensable. Callum rode through the gate and unsaddled in the dark, and put the horses up, and walked across the yard toward the bunkhouse. He stopped once, outside the barn door, and looked at the lamp in the window of the ranch house. It stayed lit a long time after the yard went quiet. The lamp in that window burned long into the night, steady in the dark of the desert, the way some things burn when they have decided not to go out. Stories like this one, small, cold, true, deserve more than one telling. If it earned something in you, carry it with you. Subscribe to the 7th chapter Tales and stay close to the fire. The frontier never ran short of stories worth knowing. It only ever ran short of people willing to stop and listen.